So a ninth part of this update series is an update about authentication. Um, we have decided to, long ago, we have decided to have the ambition to have Blender ID be the way that people log into Gitea, which is all fine and well, and this already works. There's basic code available in a project called Goth, which is the Go OAuth framework, which is being used and leveraged by Gitea to do OAuth logins. Blender ID is an OAuth compliant or inspired framework. So we were able to leverage that. I was able to write a reasonably simple implementation of a provider for Blender ID. Now, there are a couple of things that we need to do. There's the wish to not include the Blender ID code in Goth, for the simple reason that Goth is designed to be a reusable module for the world to provide login support via an OAuth provider. So essentially, it says, look, you have a website and you have some kind of application and you would like to use a GitHub login to authenticate for that application, that's fine. Make a GitHub account, make an OAuth key, provide the OAuth key in your application, and here you go. You can authenticate against GitHub or whatever. With Blender ID, we do not have this ambition to make this type of thing available to the world at large. Meaning that if we would start including it inside of the Goth source code upstream, we will run the risk of people asking, hey, I have an application and I saw this Blender ID thing, can you please give me the ability to provide to set an OAuth secret and everything, which is not what we're going to be doing on the short term. If this is something we're going to be doing, this might change, but right now we do not have that ambition. And to prevent this type of discussion from, or this type of thing becoming a workload on the side of the Blender ID admins, we've decided that it would be good to keep this code outside of Goth, but included into the Gitea repository that will work as the base, that we'll use as the basis for our Gitea implementation. So it will definitely be in the open source domain, and in fact, right now you can go to future.project.blender.org and then the Goth repository in Blender Migration, I believe, which will have the code available there for Blender ID authentication. But it's simply not very useful because we are not going to start setting people's start setting OAuth secrets for people. Now, including a private version of this type of OAuth provider with the Gitea code is very simple. It's just something that I didn't do. So that's going to be done. But more importantly, on the side of authentication, is that we also had some discussions about, okay, where do we want to have the source of truth be? Now, at the risk of being divulging a way for people to start hacking us, so to speak. Here's the upshot of our discussion. We are going to minimize the surface of attack by saying, look, the most important place where you need to be able to set any permissions is going to be on Gitea. That's where it has the most impact. We are going to have Gitea be the source of truth for authorization flags for any kind of user, and only use Blender ID to have people prove that they exist. Not what they're capable of, but prove their existence. When Blender ID has two-factor authentication support, we'll also leverage that to make sure that whoever logs in is logged in the right context of being that user, and then Gitea will have the authorization for that user available locally. there might be some artifacts or derivatives that we will be exposing back to Blender ID, specifically regarding maybe badges that get set by Gitea on Blender ID, so that on other places like DevTalk, we could have somebody have a badge which signifies this person has a Gitea account and is an active developer, or has 100 repository no 100 commits under his belt or something like that. So from that side, we will have certain types of data maybe pushed towards Blender ID. Blender ID will be the source of truth for a person's existence, and Gitea will be the source of truth for the authorizations and capabilities of that user on Gitea. And we will not export this back to Blender ID, because that would mean that we will also have to decide what happens when something gets changed on the side of Blender ID. Do we import that change and take that to be the new state of reality for Gitea, or the other way around? Like, which of these are most important? So basically we're saying, look, Gitea has precedence over that, and anything that we want to expose will be exposed in such a way that it's more of an informative property than it's an authorizational property. That's the short and long of it. That's the ninth part of this update.